Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. So in this presentation, I'll be taking you through what the SAUS leadership philosophy is and why it was built. In summary, it was built to help startup leaders who join startups as leaders, not necessarily co-founders or founders, to succeed at their roles, especially when they come from the corporate world. They're being hired to scale up the operation and scale up the company for their expertise. The majority of them, they fail. They fail because they go through a learning curve in an environment where there is nothing, and they need to build things from scratch. That means the rules related to delegation, the rules related to building and failing and learning from it, those rules usually they don't apply to the corporate world. So they have to come with a new mindset, and usually it takes them time to learn that new mindset. And most of them, they fail once or twice before they either go back to the corporate world or they get the hang of it, like me, and then they stay within the startup world. So this tool is a set of frameworks that will enable you as a startup leader to quickly decide whether joining a startup is the right move for you or no. I'm talking about career move, whether it's the right career move for you or not. And once you join, how do you deliver results and prioritize your time, your work, your resources the right way? And then how do you keep growing and learning and never get outpaced by the growth of the company? What I mean by that is that many leaders, they are probably middle management or senior officers or officers within a corporate world. They join a startup as a middle manager or a C-level, but they're not ready for it. So what happens when they grow and the company grows, they need a different caliber of a C-level. So they either get fired, or if they don't catch up, or they suddenly have a C-level boss and they get demoted, which happens very often. Even the CEOs and founders of the companies, before they get public, sometimes they get replaced. We'll go through it right now. So this slide, when you're joining a startup, there are 3 things that you need to really focus on. 1 is deliver results quickly. 2 is build a scalable operation. That's why you've been hired. And then to be able to deliver quickly, you need to learn on the go. You can't step out, learn, and come back, and that doesn't work. Or if you bring an expert from outside, the company cannot afford it, then the CEO could ask, why did we bring you then? So you cannot bring external consultants. You can get the help of peers in other industries or in other startups, or if you're part of an accelerator, you can get the help of a mentor. That's a different story. And then what the SAUS leadership philosophy is. SAUS stands for Scale Up As You Scale Up. It's an acronym which is easy to remember, of course, and it's divided in 3 levels. There is the beginner level, which is the entry level. You first have to ask yourself, is this the right move for me or not? And if it is the right move for me, what do I need to know? What's different in a startup world that I need to adapt to very quickly? Are there any resources that I could learn? Any other courses that I could take? Anything that I could take that could hack me in a way to be startup ready? That's on a beginner level. The intermediate level, there are 2 frameworks, or there is a framework and a playbook that will enable you to deliver results quickly and remain focused on high priority items, because it's easy to get distracted by the noise. And since you don't have enough data, you need to pivot a lot, you need to be flexible. It's easy to lose track and get unfocused on what really matters. And then the last level which is the ABM framework, which I'll take you through it in a bit. It's how do you remain relevant and keep business continuity in mind and sustainability in mind. That means you hire coachable people that could become leaders who replace you as your company grow. That means you don't become a bottleneck. When you go on leave or someone goes on leave, the business keeps moving. Nothing stops. These are just a few examples. This is inspired by the Maslow's pyramid of needs. So on the base, you have the foundation. You've got the SAUS leadership principles, or the SAUS principles, which are a set of principles divided into 7 dimensions. And then you've got the next level, again, the intermediate. You've got 2 tools. One of them is called the FASTMARC framework. The other one is called the MVO playbook. The FASTMARC framework is inspired by how, when you are trying to catch a fast moving target, because the fast changing conditions around the startup and the lessons that you learn and the discoveries you make as you're interacting with the customers, introducing features that could fail, this is where you have to be agile, you have to be alert, you have to be mindful, and you have to put your emotions on the side and think in a pragmatic way moving forward. The MVO playbook stands for Minimum Viable Optimization, and it is basically a simplified way of building a capacity calculator, mapping your processes, and making sure that everyone understands these processes. And then you capture the timings, you capture what skills you require, how many people do you need, and you treat it in a scientific way, but in a very simplified way, not the ways that are used, for example, in large factories or call centers. However, it's inspired by those techniques that these companies use. And then the last level, which is the ABM framework, it stands for Action-Based Mastery, which is easy to remember as well, that it's opposite or a mirror of MBA. However, the whole objective behind it is you remain focused on scalability, on hiring and coaching the right people who could become the right leaders, who can coach the next layer of leaders. They don't get sucked into office politics, or you minimize them getting sucked into office politics and emotional rivalries between departments. So that's the summary of it. These are the 7 dimensions, which are also mentioned in the book, Skill Up as You Scale Up, which has been already published for over a year. And the first dimension is self-control and leadership. Before you can lead anyone, you need to be able to lead yourself first. Stay focused on what really matters. And there are certain tools and techniques, like things that I learned that I've been using for many years. One of them is getting things done, or the GTD method of organizing the tasks, the projects, so that you free your mind to focus on solving complex problems rather than trying to retain information that you could. It's like if you try to memorize things and keep them available so you don't forget, it consumes memory power. So that way you free your mind. This is one of the tools. In the book, I'm discussing more there. The second dimension is focusing on the customers, because the easiest way to stay on track is to look at what does the customer need? How do we solve their problems? Now, it's a bit more complex, because sometimes some of the problems that you will try to solve are not probably the problems that will be profitable for you to solve. So there are other mechanics or other tools that you'll be using, but you need to be aware of them, not to be stubborn and focus on just solving the problems of the customers, and then it becomes counterintuitive and wastes time and money, and probably even leads you into getting bankrupt too early. So then dimension 3 is culture and team. What does culture mean? What does team mean? Usually the term culture is used in a very loose manner in the industry. So we need to look at it from your perspective as a leader. What does it mean to build the right culture? What are the rituals that you need to implement to make sure that people are confident, they focus on what they need to focus on, and instead of playing the blame game, for example, within a culture, within your organization. The fourth dimension is process improvements and optimization, and this is why it comes after the 3 dimensions. It comes as number 4, because after all of that, you start looking at, okay, how do I create a system that's backed by technology? It's a manual process that is backed by technology to make it transparent, make it easy for people to succeed. Everyone goes to work, they want to succeed. But when they fail and they don't have a clear way to succeed, this is where dysfunctional behaviors start lurking into your culture. Then there are 3 neglected dimensions which I touch on, which is dealing with the founders, dealing with the investors, dealing with the community. Usually these are topics reserved for founders. But even if you're not a founder, you need to understand how the dynamics work, what your role is, and what do you do when you're sucked into the politics, or you're asked to sugarcoat a fact, or you're even asked to lie to the board if you're presenting to the board or to an audit committee. What do you do? How do you deal with that? And then with the community, how do you deal with the community? Most leaders, most founders ignore the community. They focus on the customers. But sometimes just being mindful of how you impact the community could either give you a competitive edge, an advantage, or it could help you avoid a potential pitfall, right? If someone starts a misinformation campaign on your product and you're unprepared, how do you deal with that? Anyways, these are stuff that I'll be touching on very lightly. The book has been written for people who hate reading and don't have time to read. And it has already, as of today, over 120 reviews on Amazon. There is a free version of the audiobook as well. You can find it on the website, and you can listen to it on any of the podcast platforms. And then there is a human narrated version, high quality, which is available on Audible and most audiobook platforms. The FASTMARC framework is basically 8 areas. This is when you join a startup. Now you ask yourself, okay, I know the key facts, I know what's expected, and I know how a startup is different. Now, how do I prioritize my work? How do I stay focused? How do I become a leader that succeeds and takes this company into becoming a scalable, successful company? I don't become the weak link, I become a strong link within the organization. So these are 8 areas that I'll be getting into more details later on outside of this webinar. The first one is financial mindfulness. Financial mindfulness is not built for financial experts. It's built for the rest of us who are not financial experts. When you ask for resources from the CFO or from the CEO, usually the way it's done, you go through an emotional blackmail where you either blackmail them, you become noisy, you complain, you have to act that you're busy and the team is busy so that you get your resources. However, there are simpler ways of getting the right resources you require without having to go through these kind of random acts that are counterintuitive and unproductive and could have a harmful impact on the culture of the organization. I use the example of customer care. When you're asking for resources to implement the software, there are 2 ways of doing it. There is one way of first establishing the benchmarks for you. Let's say you're doing a B2B business, right? So you've got merchants or businesses that are your customers. You've got customer care agents that deal with those tickets that these customers create. So you have 3 numbers that you need to keep track of. One of them is the number of how many tickets does each business open per year. How many tickets does each agent resolve per year? And then naturally, you'll be able to count how many agents will I need by a group of businesses or merchants that you have. So that way, you transfer that pressure of why do you need more people? You're not that busy. You need to downsize, you need to reduce. All of these arguments disappear because suddenly you are implementing it and asking for resources based on facts. And when you do that for 2 or 3 years, or you do it over quarters, for example, and you're able to measure the difference, you'll be able to justify investment in technologies as well. So when you free people up to work on projects like working on tutorials, implementing self-service features, that means the tickets per customer will get reduced. That means the capacity per employee or agent will increase. All of this means that there is an increase in efficiency in the organization. And all of that has a positive impact on what you're implementing. That means your organization or your operation is becoming more scalable. This is only one of them. Every one of these areas, they have a similar impact on the business. And this is not a checklist. If you notice, some of them could become a checklist. Some of them could become a document that you maintain. Some of them could be just a routine that you maintain, like talent management. It could be a routine. It could be a philosophy that you implement. Like, for example, I encourage leaders there to not go through the traditional interviewing process. Go through an approach where you act as a customer. The potential leader comes on board, you interview them, and this is what I do. You have a meeting with them. It's not an interview. You introduce what your problem is, and then you ask them to come back with suggestions. You need to understand the way they think. How do they solve the problem? And that is your interview. And then they have to come back with a 100 days plan. Even if they're an entry-level manager or a supervisor, you need to test that kind of thinking. Anyways, in future videos, I'll be getting in more details on the FASTMARC framework. Finally, the ABM framework. There is an ABM framework that is specific to marketing. To differentiate from that, I call this the ABM leadership framework. And this is basically where you say, you know what, I need to understand, how does strategy relate to me? How do I make sure that I grow with the organization and my career transforms as fast as the growth of the organization? From an abstract point of view, a simplified point of view, there are 4 stages to a company's growth. There is a seed or pre-seed, whatever you want to call it. It's focused about building the product, achieving that product market fit, learning from the customers, what do they need, what kind of support they require. So you probably have little visibility on what the processes are. Things are a bit noisy and random, and you try to gather your facts and then organize them. So as a leader, you're probably more involved in the operations and enhancements, building system, organizing things, organizing facts, than on strategy. You're not expected to be a strategic thinker on the long run, right? So you're focused on solving the problem then. And then once you start building a routine where you deliver the support services that the customers require, this is where you probably have hired 1 or 2 people that you could train, and then you elevate yourself into a supervisor. And they do the work, you train them, and you supervise them, and you coach them. So they can become the supervisors when you hire more people later on. So that means you are elevating yourself to focus less on the operational because you're coaching people. They joined you, you're coaching them. You're more focused on enhancements. You're a designer of processes. You're a designer of routines. And you're a bit becoming more strategic because you have that headspace now, because you need to think about, okay, does it make sense to hire all the team here? It's expensive. Or should I outsource the rest of the support? Or should I automate some of these processes? Can I talk to the engineering team? Does it make sense financially to automate all of this? Are there risks associated with it? So all of these questions will be asked when you get into the medium mode. Now, when it comes to the scale-up mode, you probably have a middle management team. They are doing more of the day-to-day operation. They're probably doing more of the designing. So you're coaching them there, and you're basically tracking the design projects, and you're more focused on the strategic bit of it. Are we looking at centralizing, creating a center of excellence, decentralizing? What are the trigger points? All of these are strategic questions that when you are in a scale-up mode, you are preparing for the IPO phase. That means it's not a way where you get into that phase and there is no clear line where you say, oh, from this day or this amount of revenue, we're done, we're in. There is a transition period, which is like a gray zone between each one of these. So that's why it's important to understand this concept, as the company grows. So you understand how are you graduating from each one of these phases and what's expected out of you. And to do that, I created these tools. You can call them playbooks, you could call them brain tools. They help you. The way I usually coach the leaders is by getting them to understand what are the questions they need to answer. Initially, on a monthly basis, they would go through prioritizing their deliverables using the OKRs methodology, or objectives and key results, and getting them just to ask the strategic questions and then be mindful of what they need to prioritize. This is an example as a case study where they could have it in a Word document, in an A4 sheet, even in their own journal, where they could track all of this. So this is, in summary, what the SAUS leadership methodology is. And currently I'm working on the second book, which will tackle the FASTMARC framework and the MVO playbook. But I'm not waiting for the books to be published to be explaining all of this. This is the debut of what all of these frameworks are. And if you like it and if you're interested, make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow us, and I will be sharing more on how to utilize these frameworks so that you can succeed or increase your chances of success. Meanwhile, thank you everyone for your time, and we'll speak to you soon.